3 days after my son's wedding, he was killed in a mysterious car accident. After the funeral, the family lawyer handed me a sealed envelope with my son's handwriting on it, an address, and 3 words. You'll know why. When I reached a quiet crossroads, the truck's speakers suddenly turned on. My son's voice came through, "Dad, don't turn onto that road. They want you there." I froze. The strange part. That was the exact road the lawyer told me to take. I ignored the warning, and 5 minutes later, I discovered why. If you found Revenge Dad today, I'm glad you stayed. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from your city? Your country, I want to know. Note, some elements of this story are fictional, added for storytelling and educational value. Names and settings are coincidental, but the lessons inside are ones I hope you carry with you. The call came at 2 in the morning. Jimmy's voice on the other end was shaking so bad, I almost didn't recognize it. He'd worked at Mercer Auto for 8 years, and I'd never once heard that man sound scared. Not when a customer pulled a knife over a repair bill. Not when the garage caught a small fire back in 2019. But that night, his voice cracked like dry wood. "Boss, you need to get to Mulholland Drive, right now. It's Ethan's car." I didn't ask questions. I just grabbed my keys. I was 66 years old. I'd buried my wife 2 years before, watched cancer take Maggie piece by piece over 14 months, until there was nothing left but the sound of her breathing, and then nothing at all. I thought I knew what loss felt like. I thought I'd already paid the worst price a man could pay. I was wrong. When I pulled up to that stretch of Mulholland, the whole sky was red and blue. 3 patrol cars, an ambulance that had nothing left to do, and the wreckage of a Ford F-150 black, same year, same model as the one my son drove, reduced to a blackened frame on the side of the road. The smell hit me before I even opened the truck door. Burnt rubber, and something worse underneath it that I didn't want to name. A young officer stepped in front of me before I could get close. Sir, you need to stay behind the line." "That's my son's car." My voice didn't sound like mine. It came out flat, like a man reading words off a page he didn't write. The officer's face changed. He said something into his radio, and then a detective walked over 40's tired eyes, a coffee stain on his tie. He told me his name, but I didn't hold on to it. "Mr. Mercer," he said carefully. "The plates match a vehicle registered to Ethan James Mercer. There was the driver. The fire was extensive. We're going to need formal identification, but given the condition..." He stopped himself, pressed his lips together. "I'm very sorry. My legs didn't give out. I wanted them to. I wanted my body to do something that matched what was happening inside my chest. But I just stood there with my hands at my sides while the detective kept talking, and the lights kept spinning, and the smoke kept rising into the black California sky. Jimmy appeared beside me and grabbed my arm with both hands. His eyes were red and wet. "Boss, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I found out from a scanner. I called you right away. I didn't know what else to do." "It's all right, Jimmy." I put my hand over his. "You did right." But nothing was right. Nothing was going to be right for a long time. Ethan was 34 years old. He'd gotten married 3 days ago. 3 days. I could still see him at the altar in his dark suit, grinning like he'd won something, turning to watch Vanessa walk down the aisle. I'd sat in the front row and thought about Maggie, how she would have cried, how she would have squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, how she always said, "Ethan got his stubbornness from me and his heart from her." She wasn't wrong about either one. The week before the wedding, Ethan had driven out to the shop and we'd shared a couple of beers in the garage after closing. He was electric that night, more alive than I'd seen him in months. "Dad, I'm telling you, this project is going to change everything," he'd said, leaning back against the workbench with that grin I'd known since he was 8 years old. "The way people protect their money, their real assets, it's broken. What we're building at Mercer Logic is going to fix that. I can't say too much yet, but..." He'd tapped the side of his head. "Big things coming." "You sound like every 20-year-old who ever walked into a bank," I told him. He laughed. "I'm 34, Dad. You sound like a 20-year-old. He'd laughed harder, and I'd laughed with him, and I'd thought, this is it. This is what you work 40 years for. Moments like this one. Standing on Mulholland Drive at 2 in the morning, I held on to that memory like it was the last solid thing in the world. The funeral was 9 days later. The way they do it here, time for arrangements for family to travel for paperwork that turns a person into a file number. Vanessa handled most of it. She wore black every day and accepted condolences with exactly the right expression on her face. People kept telling me how strong she was being. I watched her, Old habit 40 years of diagnosing engines teaches you to notice when something's running wrong, even when it looks fine on the outside. And something about Vanessa Hale had been running wrong since the moment I shook her hand at the rehearsal dinner. At the reception after the burial, I stood near the back of the room with a plate of food I hadn't touched, watching her work the crowd. She touched people's arms at exactly the right moments. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, but I was close enough and I was paying attention, and I never once saw that tissue come away wet. That was when Frank pulled me aside. Frank Delaney was 69 years old, ran the repair shop next to mine, and had spent 20 years with the LAPD before he decided he'd rather fix cars than people. He was the kind of man who said 3 words when 2 would do. He leaned in close, his voice low enough that nobody else could hear, and what he said made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. "Tom," he glanced once toward Vanessa, then back at me. His jaw was tight. "I serviced that truck last week. Brake system was perfect. I checked it twice because Ethan asked me to, said he wanted everything solid before the honeymoon." I stared at him. A car with a perfect brake system. Frank said each word slow and deliberate. Does not just catch fire on a dry road on a clear night. My hand tightened around the plate until my knuckles went white. "Then what are you saying?" I asked, though some part of me, the part that had spent 40 years figuring out why machines failed, already knew exactly what he was saying. Frank looked me dead in the eye. "I'm saying somebody made that car fail, Tom, and I think we both need to find out who." Richard Cole's office was on the 12th floor of a glass tower in Century City, the kind of building where everything was designed to make you feel small before you even sat down. The carpet was dark gray. The furniture was the color of old money. The air conditioning ran so cold that I pulled my jacket tighter the moment I stepped off the elevator, and I thought Ethan hated the cold. He always said LA had no business being cold anywhere indoors or out. I'd known Richard for 15 years. He'd handled Maggie's estate after she passed, quiet and efficient, never once made me feel like I was just another file on his desk. At the time, I thought that made him a good man. Standing in his waiting room in my funeral suit, I wasn't so sure anymore. Vanessa was already there when I arrived, sitting with her ankles crossed and her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a flight, not the reading of her dead husband's will. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than a week of payroll at my shop. And her nails I noticed, because I always notice details. 40 years of reading machines teaches you that we're painted a deep, fresh red. Not chipped, not rushed. Done that morning, or maybe the day before. Who gets a manicure the week their husband dies? Thomas. She stood and reached for my hands, and her grip was warm and practiced. "I'm so glad you're here. This is all so overwhelming." "It is," I said. I held her hands for exactly as long as was polite, then let go. Richard came out of his office and shook my hand, with both of his that old lawyer move that's supposed to feel personal, but never quite does. He was a 55 silver at the temples, the kind of tan you get from actual vacations rather than yard work. His suit fit the way suits fit when someone else picks them out for you. "Thomas, thank you for coming. I know this is an incredibly difficult time." He gestured toward the conference room. "Please come in. I want to be clear about what today is. This isn't the formal probate hearing. That process takes 4 to 6 months through the court. As the executor Ethan named, I simply have the right to brief you both on the preliminary terms. Think of it as a first look." We sat down across from each other, Vanessa and I, with Richard at the head of the table. He opened a leather folder and cleared his throat. Ethan's estate, as currently valued, totals approximately $5.9 million, inclusive of Mercer Logic equity liquid assets and personal property. He paused to let the number settle. Under the terms of the will, the full estate transfers to Vanessa upon completion of probate. The timeline, as I mentioned, will be 4 to 6 months minimum pending court approval. Vanessa pressed 2 fingers to her lips and her eyes went glassy. It was a very good performance. I'd give her that. There are, however, specific personal bequests noted separately. Richard continued, and he slid a small envelope across the table toward me. "For you, Thomas." Ethan was quite specific. I picked up the envelope. My name was written on the front in Ethan's handwriting, that same cramped left-leaning print he'd had since grade school. My throat tightened so fast it hurt. Inside a key I didn't recognize, and a folded piece of paper with a handwritten address in Palmdale. Below the address, 3 words in Ethan's hand. "You'll know why." Richard folded his hands on the table. "Ethan also left you the F-150 currently stored at your shop. He said you'd understand the significance. I looked up from the paper. Why would he leave me a truck that's been sitting in my garage for a year? I imagine that's something only you would know, Richard said smoothly. That was when I felt that same instinct I get when an engine sounds slightly off. Nothing I could name yet. Just a frequency that didn't belong. I folded the paper and tucked it into my jacket pocket. And as I did, I caught it just a flicker. Vanessa's eyes tracked that piece of paper the way a cat tracks something moving across a floor. Fast hungry then, carefully neutral again, the instant she realized I was looking. But she didn't reach for it, didn't ask what it said, didn't say a word. I turned that over in my mind the way I'd turn over a strange part I'd never seen before. You'd expect a wife, even a grieving one, to ask what her father-in-law just received from her dead husband. The fact that she didn't ask wasn't grief. It was patience. The kind of patience you practice. She doesn't need to take it something. In me said slowly, she already knows what's in it. She's making sure I take it myself. Richard was talking again, timelines, court dates, something about estate taxes. I nodded in the right places, but my mind was already somewhere else, already turning over the address in Palmdale, the key, the truck sitting in my shop, and the look in Vanessa Hale's eyes when she thought I wasn't watching. We shook hands in the lobby. Vanessa hugged me. Her perfume was expensive and cold, and told me to call her if I needed anything at all. Richard walked us to the elevator, with his hand briefly on my shoulder, told me he was just a phone call away day or night. The elevator doors closed. I breathed out for the first time in an hour. In the parking garage, I unlocked the F-150, the old one, the one from my shop that I'd driven over this morning, because it felt right somehow, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The garage was quiet, except for the distant hum of ventilation. I opened the center console, and there it was, a burner phone. Cheap prepaid, the kind you buy at a gas station. Fully charged. One unread message on the screen from a number I'd never seen before. My hand was shaking when I opened it. 4 words. Dad. Don't go alone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until 4 in the morning, with the burner phone in front of me and a cup of coffee that went cold an hour before I stopped pretending to drink it. I tried calling the number back 3 times. It rang. Nobody picked up. The 4th time, it went straight to voicemail. No greeting, no name, just a generic prompt that told me nothing. I drove to the shop at 6. Frank was already there, the way Frank was always there before anyone else, sitting on an overturned milk crate outside his garage next door, with a thermos of black coffee and a newspaper he wasn't really reading. He looked up when he heard my truck, and whatever he saw on my face made him set down the paper immediately. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't." I sat down on the crate beside him. "I need to tell you something." I showed him the burner phone, showed him the message, watched his eyes move across those 4 words, Dad. Don't go alone, and then watched him look up at me with an expression I hadn't seen on Frank Delaney's face in all the years I'd known him. Something careful, something alert. "Where'd you find it?" he asked. "Center console of the F-150. The old one, the one that's been sitting in my bay since last year when Ethan bought the new truck." I leaned forward and pressed my hands flat on my knees. "Frank, that truck hasn't moved in 12 months. Nobody touches it but me. Vanessa's never even been inside my shop. Ethan always came alone, which means if Ethan put something in that truck, he put it there, knowing she'd never find it." Frank turned the phone over in his hands slowly, the way he'd turn over an unfamiliar engine part. "You try calling back?" 4 times. Nothing. He handed it back to me. "And the address in Palmdale." I pulled the folded paper from my shirt pocket and laid it on his knee. He looked at it for a long moment. "I'm going with you," he said. It wasn't a question. "I figured you'd say that." "Smart man." He stood up and finished the last of his thermos in one long swallow. "Give me 10 minutes." We took the F-150. I drove Frank Road's shotgun with his old police scanner on the dashboard, a habit he'd never broken since the day he handed in his badge. The Freeway 14 North was quiet that early. The desert hills gold and brown on either side, the sky the particular shade of pale blue that only exists for about 40 minutes after sunrise before the heat burns it out. Somewhere past Agua Dulce, Frank broke the quiet. "You know what bothers me most?" he said, watching the road ahead. "What, the fire?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I've worked on cars for 30 years, Tom. Before that, I worked crime scenes for 20. You know what it takes to make a car fire look like an accident, convincingly enough to fool a first response team. Tell me. Planning, time, and somebody who knows exactly where to cut. He turned to look at me. This wasn't road rage. This wasn't a mechanical failure. Somebody knew that truck, knew the route, knew the timing. My jaw tightened so hard my back teeth ached. Ethan's honeymoon route. Exactly. Who knew where they were headed? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The GPS took us off the main road about 6 miles outside Palmdale, a 2-lane stretch that narrowed into dirt scrub brush on both sides, no houses, no other traffic. The kind of road that existed specifically to take you somewhere nobody would look for you. And then the screen on the center console lit up. Not the GPS. Something else, something underneath the display layer, pushing through like a signal that had been waiting. The whole screen flushed red. Frank grabbed the dashboard. What the... I don't know. I gripped the wheel tighter. Then the speakers crackled, and a voice came through clear close like someone sitting in the back seat. Dad? My foot came off the accelerator without me telling it to. The truck coasted. If you're hearing this, you're on the road to Palmdale, and you're still alive, which means they haven't moved yet. Dad, don't turn left at the fork. That's a trap. There's a building at the end of that road, and inside it, there's evidence, but it's not Ethan's evidence. It's theirs. They built it to frame you. If you go in there, you become the suspect. That's what they want. The voice paused. When it came back, it was quieter, rougher around the edges. I know you have questions. I know this doesn't make sense yet, but I'm asking you to trust me the way you always ask me to trust you. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry for all of it. Then the screen went dark. The speakers went silent. The truck rolled to a stop at the fork in the road. Frank's hand found my arm. His grip was iron. Tom, his voice was barely above a whisper. That was Ethan. Every muscle in my body was shaking. My eyes burned hot, and I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth because I was 66 years old, and I was not going to fall apart on a dirt road in the Mojave Desert. I refused, but God help me hearing my son's voice when I'd spent 9 days believing he was ash and bone and a case number. Tom. Frank's grip tightened. Look at me. I looked at him. His eyes were steady, waiting. The left fork, I said. My voice came out wrecked, scraped raw. Ethan said don't. I heard him. I put the truck in gear. Every rational thought I had said, turn around, go back, call somebody. But the paper in my pocket had Ethan's handwriting on it. The voice in the speakers had my son's laugh underneath the fear. And somewhere underneath my own fear was a mechanic's logic I couldn't argue with. If someone built this trap, they built it to be found, which meant there was something inside that building they didn't want found by the wrong hands, and that was exactly why I needed to see it first. I turned left. The headlights swept across a low concrete building at the end of the road, half hidden by overgrown brush. The door was metal, slightly open, like someone had left it that way on purpose, like something was waiting inside. Frank checked the door handle on his side and said very quietly, "Whatever's in there, we don't touch anything." Agreed, I said, but neither of us moved yet, because at that exact moment from somewhere behind the building came the distant, unmistakable wail of a police siren. I pushed the metal door open with my shoulder. The smell hit me first, damp concrete and old motor oil and something chemical underneath it, all sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. Frank was right behind me, one hand on my back, the other, holding his phone up for light. The room was wrong from the first second. Not wrong like abandoned, wrong like arranged. Every surface was too clean, too deliberate, the kind of clean that takes effort, rather than the kind that comes from nobody being there. A folding table against the far wall, papers laid out in neat stacks, a manila envelope in the center with my name typed on the label. "Don't touch anything," Frank said behind me, and I was already pulling my hands back toward my chest. I leaned in close without touching and read what I could see. Financial records, wire transfers, account numbers, with my name on the signature lines. Photographs printed on plain paper, grainy, but clear enough me, apparently meeting with men I'd never seen before in locations I'd never been to. A cell phone and a Ziploc bag screen, cracked with a yellow evidence tag, already attached like someone expected it to be collected. My stomach turned over hard. "Frank," I said, "they built an entire case against me. I see it." His voice was clipped professional, 20 years of crime scenes clicking back into place behind his eyes. He was already photographing everything with his phone, moving carefully, not disturbing a single sheet of paper. Wire fraud, probably conspiracy. Whoever did this knew exactly what a DA's office needs to move forward. "Richard," I said. The word came out like something I'd bitten down on too hard. "It has to be." Frank lowered his phone. "Tom, we need to call this in." "No." The word came out harder than I intended. I turned to face him. "Ethan warned me. He said Richard has someone inside LAPD. If we call this in, whoever responds writes the report, and the report says I was here." Frank went very still, and I watched it move across his face, the old cop instinct fighting the new knowledge and then settling, because 20 years on the force had also taught him exactly how dirty it could get inside a department when the wrong people were connected. "You're right," he said finally, and it clearly cost him something to say it. "Okay, we go, now." We moved toward the back of the building. A rusted door opened onto a dry wash behind the property scrub brush, loose gravel, the kind of terrain that swallowed footprints. We pushed through into the open air just as the sound of tires on dirt road crackled from the front. One patrol car, moving slowly like it wasn't sure what it was looking for yet. Frank grabbed my arm and pulled me low behind a stand of brush. We didn't breathe. The patrol car's spotlight swept once across the front of the building, paused on the open door, and then the radio crackled loud enough to carry across the desert, quiet something about an anonymous tip, a possible trespasser. Anonymous tip. Someone called it in the moment we arrived, someone who knew exactly when we'd get here. We circled wide through the brush and came back to the F-150 from the far side out of the patrol car's sightline. I started the engine without the headlights and rolled slowly back down the dirt road until we hit asphalt, and only then did I breathe all the way out. Frank checked his mirror. "We've got company." A black SUV, no plates visible, sitting 200 yards back. The moment we accelerated, it accelerated. Every turn I made, it made. 20 miles of it all the way back toward the freeway, that vehicle holding its distance like it owned the space between us. I kept both hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road, and my voice as steady as I could make it. "They wanted me inside that building," I said. "They wanted my footprints on the floor and my fingerprints on the envelope. And instead, they've got nothing," Frank said. "Because you listened to your son." I exhaled slowly. The SUV was still there in the mirror, patient and black against the pale desert road. "Frank," I said quietly, "Ethan is alive." Frank didn't answer right away. He looked straight ahead at the road unrolling in front of us, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough around the edges in a way I hadn't heard before. "Yeah, Tom," he said. "I think he is. Before I go any further on, Revenge Dad, if you're still here with me, drop the number 5 in the comments right now. Just a 5. That's how I know you haven't left yet. Heads up, the story ahead contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling and educational purposes. If that's not your thing, no pressure to stay." The SUV stopped following us somewhere around Silmar. 1 minute it was there in the mirror, steady and patient, and then it turned off onto a side street and was gone. No explanation, no final move. Just gone the way a chess piece gets pulled back when the player decides to wait another turn. I didn't relax. I'd stopped trusting disappearances the moment I walked into that building in Palmdale and saw my name printed on documents I'd never signed. We got back to the shop a little after 3 in the afternoon. I pulled the F-150 into the far bay, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment with both hands still on the wheel. My shoulders ached from gripping too hard for too long. Every muscle between my neck and my lower back had been locked up since the moment that patrol car's spotlight swept across the kiosk door, and the tension hadn't gone anywhere, just because the danger had. Frank climbed out and rolled the bay door shut behind us, then hit the lights. Not the overheads, just the work lamp above the main bench. Low and yellow, the way we used to work late nights when we were younger. And the jobs never seemed to end, and Maggie would show up at 10 o'clock with sandwiches and tell us we were idiots for not going home. Jimmy Ford was waiting. He was sitting on an overturned crate near the tool wall, still in his work shirt, hands wrapped around a bottle of water he hadn't opened. He looked up when we came in, and the relief on his face was so raw, it almost hurt to see the face of a man who had spent 2 hours running through every bad version of a story and hadn't been able to stop any of them. "You're okay," he said. His voice cracked on the last word like something that had been held at tension too long. "I've been sitting here for 2 hours thinking I didn't know if I should call someone or just wait or..." "We're okay, Jimmy," I put my hand on his shoulder and squeezed once. "We're okay?" He nodded fast and pressed his lips together hard the way a man does when he's trying not to show how scared he was. I'd known Jimmy for 8 years. He was the kind of person who showed up early and left late and never once asked for recognition or praise or anything beyond the satisfaction of a job done right. He was the kind of person you don't fully appreciate until the moment you realize he's been holding things together in the background the entire time quietly without complaint, because that's simply who he is. Seeing him that shaken made something tighten in my chest all over again. Frank pulled up a stool and opened his laptop, the one he kept in his truck, for exactly the kind of situations he'd spent 20 years walking into and learning how to navigate. He started typing before he even sat down. All the way, his jaw set, his eyes moving, with the focused efficiency of a man who knew exactly what he was looking for. "Vanessa Hale," he said without looking up. "Let's see who you really are." I stood at the bench and watched the screen and didn't say anything. Outside, the neighborhood was doing what East LA neighborhoods do in the late afternoon. Kids somewhere, somebody's music, the distant sound of a lawnmower 3 blocks over. The ordinary sounds of a world that had no idea what was happening inside this particular building on this particular street. The answer came back in under 10 minutes. It hit the room like a wrench dropped on a concrete floor. "There's no Vanessa Hale prior to 2019. Frank said, slowly reading off the screen. His jaw tightened with every word, one sentence at a time, like a man building a case in real time and not liking where it was going. No driver's license history, no tax records, no social security activity, nothing before 4 years ago. He turned the laptop to face me. "But there is a Diana Reeves." I leaned in. The screen showed an FBI database summary, the kind Frank could still access through a retired officer contact he'd never fully lost touch with, one of those quiet professional relationships that survives a badge being handed in because trust doesn't expire the way employment does. The photograph was smaller than I wanted it to be, but it was enough. Younger, different hair, lighter and longer, but the same jaw, the same careful measuring eyes that had tracked that piece of paper across Richard's conference table without her head moving at all. "New York," Frank read. 2018, married a real estate developer name, doesn't matter. 14 months later, he died in a car accident. Single vehicle, mountain road, ruled accidental. He stopped, looked up at me. "Sound familiar?" The blood drained out of my face so fast I had to put one hand on the workbench to steady myself. My legs didn't give out. I wouldn't let them. But for a moment, the floor felt like it was made of something less reliable than concrete. The entire estate transferred offshore within 72 hours of his death. Frank continued, his voice going flat and hard the way it did when he was reciting facts that disgusted him, and he was choosing professionalism over the alternative. "Diana Reeves disappeared before the FBI could formally question her. The case went cold inside of 8 months." The room was very quiet. Jimmy made a sound from the end of the bench, not quite a word, not quite a curse, somewhere in the territory between the two. He stood up from his crate and walked to the far end of the workbench and stood there with his back to us for a long moment, both hands gripping the edge of the metal surface knuckles, white against the steel. I watched his shoulders rise and fall once, twice. Then he turned around. His eyes were red at the edges, and his jaw was working like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. "Boss," he said, 2 weeks before the wedding, Ethan came in here after hours. Just the two of us, you'd already gone home. Frank wasn't around. We were finishing up a brake job on the Silverado in Bay 2. He stopped, swallowed hard. He asked me something weird. Out of nowhere, just set down his wrench and looked at me and said, "Jimmy, if you found out the person you loved was somebody completely different than who you thought, what would you do?" The hum of the refrigerator unit in the corner was the only sound in the shop. "What did you tell him?" I asked. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "I told him I'd want to know the truth first," Jimmy said. "Before I did anything else, before I said a word or made a move, I'd want to know everything, the whole picture, because you can't fix something you don't fully understand." He swallowed again. He nodded, like I'd said exactly what he needed to hear, like he'd been waiting for someone to give him permission to do whatever he'd already decided to do. Jimmy's voice cracked on the last words. Then he just picked up his wrench and went back to work and never mentioned it again. He looked at me with something desperate and sorrowful moving across his face. "Boss, he knew. He already knew, didn't he?" I couldn't answer him. My throat had closed up so completely that if I'd tried to speak, I'm not sure what would have come out, and 66 years of keeping myself together in front of other people told me this was not the moment to find out. Frank shut the laptop with a quiet click. "Ethan knew who she was before the wedding," he said. His voice was steady in the way that Frank's voice got steady when everything around him was falling apart, a deliberate, practiced steadiness that came from 2 decades of standing in rooms where people needed someone to hold the line. Which means he walked into that ceremony with his eyes wide open. He rubbed one hand across his jaw. The question is why? What was he trying to do? None of us had an answer for that yet. I was still standing at the bench with my throat locked and my hand flat on the cold metal and my mind running hard through everything. Palmdale, the documents with my name on them, the burner phone, Ethan's voice through the speakers of the F-150, telling me not to turn left when the phone vibrated against my hip. I pulled it out. New message, same number as every message before. The message was in Vietnamese, a language Ethan had picked up somewhere along the way. One I'd never learned properly despite Maggie laughing at me for it for 30 years. I couldn't read every word, but I'd learned enough from Ethan over the years to understand what it said, 48 hours. After that, they file with the DA. Find Sandra Ortiz, FBI, Field Office, Wilshire Boulevard. Come alone. 48 hours. I set the phone face down on the workbench and pressed both palms flat against the cold metal and breathed in through my nose, slow and deliberate, the way I'd learned to breathe when an engine was on fire and the heat was coming at you, and panic was the one thing that would get you killed faster than anything else. The FBI, Sandra Ortiz, Wilshire Boulevard. Ethan was pointing me somewhere, same as the burner phone in the truck. Same as the program in the GPS. He was leaving me a trail and trusting that I was the kind of man who could follow it without falling apart in the middle. I was going to have to be that man. "Frank," I said. "Yeah." He was already closing the laptop and reaching for his jacket. "Tomorrow morning, first thing, I'm going to the FBI." Frank picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, and set it back down on the bench with a quiet final sound. "I'll drive," he said. I didn't tell Frank I was going. I left before 6 while the street outside the shop was still gray, and the traffic on the 10 freeway was thin enough that I could drive without thinking too hard about anything except the road. I told myself it was practical. One person walking into an FBI office draws less attention than two. But the truth was simpler than that. Frank had already put himself in the middle of something that could get very bad very fast, and I wasn't willing to pull him in any deeper until I knew what I was actually walking into. The FBI field office on Wilshire Boulevard looked exactly like what it was, a federal building that had no interest in making you feel welcome. Glass and concrete security cameras at every angle, a lobby that made you aware of every pocket you had and everything inside them. I gave my name at the front desk and asked for Special Agent Sandra Ortiz. The woman behind the desk looked at me the way people look at someone who's shown up without an appointment to a place that doesn't encourage surprises. "Is she expecting you?" she asked. "No," I said, "but she'll want to hear what I have to say." I sat in a plastic chair for 22 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall and counted. Then a door opened and a woman walked out who moved like someone who hadn't wasted a single step in her entire professional life. Sandra Ortiz was 48 years old, medium height, dark hair pulled straight back. A charcoal jacket that had seen a lot of long days. She looked at me, the way I imagined she looked at everything, like she was already 3 steps ahead of whatever I was about to say and was simply waiting to see if I'd surprise her. She didn't offer her hand. She said, "Mr. Mercer, come with me." Her office was small and aggressively organized. No personal photographs, no plants. A whiteboard on one wall covered in names and dates and connecting lines that she turned face first against the wall the moment I walked in. She sat down, folded her hands on the desk, and looked at me. "You said you had something to say," she said. "Say it." I laid Frank's photographs on her desk. Every shot from inside the Palmdale building, the fake financial records, the stage evidence, the envelope with my name on it. I set them out one by one without speaking, and I watched her face as she looked at them. She didn't react. Not the way a person reacts when something surprises them. She reacted the way a person reacts when something confirms what they already knew. "Where did you get these?" she asked. "I was there," I said. "Last night, someone sent me the address." She looked up. "Who?" "I think you already know the answer to that." Something shifted in her expression, not much, just a fraction, the way a gauge needle moves when pressure changes. She picked up one of the photographs and studied it for a long moment. "Mr. Mercer," she said carefully, "I'm not in a position to confirm or deny an ongoing federal investigation." "Then I'll do it for you." I leaned forward. "You've been watching Richard Cole. You've been watching Diana Reeves, the woman my son married under the name Vanessa Hale. You've been watching them for a while, and whatever you've been building, it isn't finished yet, which is why you haven't moved." I held her gaze. "Am I close?" Sandra Ortiz set the photograph down. She was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. I counted those too. "Under the Crime Victims' Rights Act," she said slowly, "I have an obligation to inform individuals of credible threats against them. That's the legal basis for what I'm about to tell you." She opened a drawer, pulled out a thin folder, and laid it on the desk between us. "We have been monitoring Richard Cole and Diana Reeves for 11 months. Your son contacted this office 3 weeks before his wedding. He provided us with enough preliminary information to justify continued surveillance, but not enough for an arrest warrant. We needed more direct evidence of criminal intent." My hands pressed flat against my knees under the desk. "Ethan," I said, "he came to you." "He did." Her voice didn't soften exactly, but something in it acknowledged the weight of what she was saying. "He was cooperative and he was careful. He understood the risk he was taking." She paused. "He also understood that if he surfaced too soon, Richard Cole's contact inside the LAPD would know within hours, which would put him in immediate danger. So he stayed hidden. He had to." I exhaled slowly through my nose. "Is he safe?" Sandra Ortiz looked at me for a long moment. She didn't say yes, she didn't say no, but she didn't look away, and something in the steadiness of her gaze told me what she wouldn't put into words. "We filed for a temporary restraining order this morning," she said, moving on in that way that answered without answering. "To freeze the assets of Mercer Logic Inc. during the investigation. It's a protective measure. It prevents any unauthorized transfer of company assets while the case is active. Richard can't touch Ethan's company. Not while the TRO stands." I nodded. My throat was tight, but my hands had stopped shaking somewhere in the last 5 minutes, and I noticed that the way you notice the moment an engine finally turns over after a long, cold start. Sandra slid a photograph across the desk toward me. I looked down at it. Richard Cole and Vanessa Diana standing outside a restaurant in Beverly Hills, laughing, easy with each other, the way people are easy with each other when they've known each other long enough to stop pretending. The timestamp in the corner of the image read 6 months before Ethan ever mentioned her name to me. My stomach dropped all the way to the floor. "He found her first," I said. It wasn't a question. "Richard Cole identified Diana Reeves as an asset and recruited her approximately 2 years ago," Sandra said. "Your son never had a chance meeting. Everything was engineered from the beginning." I picked up the photograph, looked at Richard's face, looked at the easy confidence of a man who had never once considered the possibility that he might lose. My jaw tightened until my back teeth ached. "What do you need from me?" I asked. I sat in the F-150 for a long time after I left the building. Not because I didn't know where to go, because I needed a minute, just 1 minute to sit somewhere that wasn't a federal office with fluorescent lights and a woman who measured every word she said, like it cost her something, and just let everything I'd heard in the last hour settle into the right places. The parking structure on Wilshire was cool and dim. Somewhere above me, the city was doing what LA always does, moving, burning, pretending everything is fine. Down here, it was just concrete, and the distant sound of traffic and the photograph still in my hand. Richard Cole, 15 years. He'd sat beside me the night Maggie died, held my hand in the hospital corridor while the nurses came and went, and the sound of Ethan crying somewhere down the hall nearly broke me in half. I'd trusted that man with everything with Maggie's estate, with the paperwork that turned her life into a series of legal documents, with the quiet, dignified business of grief. And he had been calculating the whole time. My phone buzzed. "Sandra, are you still in the structure?" "Yes." "Come back up. There's more you need to hear." She was standing at the window of her office when I walked back in, looking down at Wilshire, with her arms crossed and her back to the door. She didn't turn around immediately, which told me she was deciding something, choosing which words to use the way a surgeon chooses an instrument. "Sit down, Mr. Mercer," she said. I sat. She turned. Richard Cole has been under SEC investigation since 2021. Undisclosed offshore accounts, falsified client reporting, securities fraud, spanning at least 4 years. The investigation stalled because Richard is careful. He uses intermediaries, he layers transactions, and he has enough legal knowledge to stay just far enough ahead of the paper trail. She sat down across from me. When Ethan's company began developing its financial security software, our analysts flagged it immediately. Software capable of automated fraud detection at the level Ethan was building would expose Richard's entire offshore network, every hidden account, every falsified transfer, all of it. I leaned forward. So this was never about the money in Ethan's estate. $5.9 million is nothing to Richard Cole, Sandra said flatly. He moves that through 3 accounts before breakfast. What he cannot survive, what would end everything he's built over 20 years, is Ethan's software reaching the market. She held my gaze. Diana Reeves was not recruited to steal from your son, Mr. Mercer. She was recruited to make sure he never finished what he started. The air went out of the room. I'd spent 40 years fixing machines. I knew what it looked like when something was broken all the way down to the foundation, when it wasn't one failed part, but a systemic rot that had been spreading quietly for years. Sitting in Sandra Ortiz's office on a Wednesday afternoon in September, I finally understood what I was actually looking at. The trust document, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The one Richard drew up, the one that sends Ethan's estate through Vanessa. Fraudulent, Sandra confirmed. The administrative fees and legal costs buried in the language amount to approximately 40% of the total estate value, all routed through accounts tied to Richard. Standard probate attorneys would catch it eventually. But eventually, in this case, was all Richard needed. Enough time for Ethan's company to be dissolved, his software to be buried, and Diana to be offshore before anyone started asking the right questions. Wire fraud, I said. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence. She said the charges the way someone reads items off a list, methodical without emphasis, which somehow made them worse. And this is not the first time. She opened the folder again and slid a single page across the desk. Sacramento, 2019. A name I didn't recognize. A man who had died in what was ruled a boating accident on Lake Tahoe. He had a daughter building a competing investment platform, Sandra said quietly. The daughter walked away from the project after her father died. Coincidence, Richard's attorneys argued at the time. No charges were ever filed. She paused. That family didn't have an Ethan. My chest felt like something heavy had been set down on it and left there. How many people has he done this to? I asked. Sandra looked at me for a long moment. She didn't answer, but her jaw tightened by a fraction, and in 20 years of reading machines, I'd learned that the sounds an engine doesn't make tell you just as much as the ones it does. What does he need from me? I asked. Richard. What does he think I am to him right now? A grieving old man, Sandra said. Isolated, emotional, easy to manipulate and easier to frame. She folded her hands. Which is exactly what we need him to keep thinking. I stood up to leave. My legs felt steadier than they had any right to. Then my phone rang. Jimmy. Boss. His voice was tight and low, the way it gets when he's trying not to be overheard. 2 men just came to the shop. Said they were LAPD, showed badges, asked where you were when you'd be back. What did you tell them? That I didn't know. That you hadn't been in since yesterday. A beat. Boss, I recognized one of them. Not from the precinct. From before. 2 weeks before the wedding, there was a car parked across the street from the shop for 3 days straight. Different car each time, but same guy driving. I noticed because I notice cars. That same guy just showed me a badge and told me his name was Detective Morrison. My hand tightened around the phone until the case creaked. Richard's man, inside the LAPD, right on schedule. You did right, Jimmy, I said. Lock up and go home. Use the back door. I looked at Sandra. She'd heard every word. It's starting, she said. It already started, I told her. We're just the ones catching up. Richard picked up on the second ring. Thomas. His voice was warm and practiced the kind of warm that gets installed rather than grown. I've been thinking about you all day. How are you holding up? I was sitting in the front office of the shop with the lights off my back to the window, the way Frank had told me, to sit no silhouette, no shadow. Sandra was 3 feet away at the workbench, her jacket off, running a cable between 2 devices I didn't have names for. Frank was under the F-150 in the far bay, doing something slow and deliberate with a panel near the rear speaker housing. "Not great, Richard," I said. I let my voice go rough and tired, which wasn't hard because I was rough and tired. "I keep thinking about the address Ethan left me, the one in Palmdale." A half-second pause, barely anything. The length of time it takes a man to decide whether to show his cards. "Did you go?" Richard asked. "I drove out there," I said. But I couldn't make myself go inside. I sat in the parking lot for an hour, and then I came home. I put a crack in my voice, not too big, just enough. "I don't know what's wrong with me, Richard. I feel like I'm losing my mind." "That's completely normal," he said, smooth as engine oil. "Grief does that. It makes the simplest decisions feel impossible. You don't need to rush anything, Thomas. The address will still be there when you're ready." Sandra caught my eye and gave a single nod. The devices were running. "I know," I said. I wanted to hear a familiar voice, someone who knew Ethan." "Of course." Another pause, and underneath the warmth, I could hear it now. The faint hum of satisfaction, like a machine running exactly the way its builder intended. "You call me anytime, day or night. I mean that." "Thank you, Richard." I ended the call and set the phone on the bench. My hand was steady. I was surprised by that. "Good," Sandra said, pulling one earbud out. "Natural, believable, nothing that sounds coached. He'll report back to Diana tonight that you went to Palmdale and lost your nerve. That buys us time." She began labeling the recording device with a strip of tape and a marker. "I need to explain something before we go further. California is a two-party consent state. Normally recording a conversation without the other person's knowledge is illegal. But this morning I obtained a Title III wiretap order from a federal judge. That order supersedes state law. Everything you record from this point forward, every call, every meeting is fully admissible in federal court." "You planned this before I walked in this morning," I said. She didn't deny it. "We've been waiting for someone on your side of this to come to us. Ethan told us you would." She snapped the case shut. "Don't disappoint him." Frank rolled out from under the F-150 and stood up, wiping his hands on a shop rag. 4 mics in the cabin, 2 up front, 2 in the rear panel. Range is good to about 300 feet with the relay. Anything said inside that truck from now on, we hear it. Jimmy locked the front door and pulled the blinds. He didn't ask questions. He never asked questions, which was one of the reasons I'd kept him around for 8 years. He just moved to the corner of the shop near the tool wall and stood there like a man who understood that the best thing he could do right now was take up as little space as possible. Sandra and Frank left together a little after 9. Jimmy left 20 minutes after that, and I heard his car start and pull away. And then the shop was quiet in the way that shops get quiet after hours, not peaceful, just empty. I didn't go home. I sat on the rolling stool near the back workbench, and I looked at the tools hanging on the pegboard above it. 40 years of collecting each one in its place, each one with a memory attached. The half-inch torque wrench Ethan had knocked off the bench and bent when he was 9 years old and tried to hide under a pile of rags. The set of combination wrenches Maggie had given me our first Christmas after the shop opened, wrapped in red paper with a bow that she'd spent 20 minutes trying to get right, and I'd torn the whole thing open in about 4 seconds, and she'd laughed at me for a week about it. I picked up the smallest wrench in the set, turned it over in my palm. "Maggie," I said out loud to the empty shop. My voice came out rougher than I expected. "I could really use your particular brand of clarity right now. You always could see the thing I was too close to see." I set the wrench down. "He's alive," I said. "Ethan's alive. I don't know how to feel that yet. Every time I start to feel it, something pulls the rug out." I pressed my palm flat against the cold steel of the bench. "I need you to tell me I'm not going to get him killed by doing this wrong." The shop didn't answer. It never does. But I sat there in the quiet for a while and let myself feel the full weight of everything, the grief that was still real, even though its shape had changed, the fear that sat just underneath the anger, and underneath that something I hadn't felt in 10 days. Something that felt almost like hope. The burner phone rang, not a text, a call. A real call live from the same number that had sent every message before. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. I picked up. "Dad." Ethan's voice, not a recording, not a program, not a message left in a machine. Live, present, breathing. "I know it's late. I'm sorry. I needed to hear your voice." My eyes burned so hot and fast that I couldn't speak for a full 3 seconds. I pressed my free hand over my mouth and breathed through my nose and told myself, "Not yet. Hold on, hold on." "Ethan?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Where are you?" "Somewhere safe," he said. "I promise. I can't say more than that right now." A pause. "Are you okay?" The laugh that came out of me was wet and broken, and nothing like a laugh at all. "No," I said honestly. "But I'm getting there." I wiped my face with the back of my wrist. "Your mother's wrench set is still hanging right where she put it." A sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then very quietly, "I know." "Ethan." I straightened up, squared my shoulders the way I'd taught him to square his. "Tell me what you need me to do." A pause. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. Older somehow, the way voices get when they've been carrying something too heavy for too long. "Dad," he said, "I need you to do something very dangerous, and I need you to trust me completely." Before I reveal what I found out that completely changed everything, comment "I'm still here" below, so I know you're with me for this next part. Because what comes next, I don't think you're ready. Note, some moments in this story have been shaped for emotional and educational impact. Details may be fictional, but everything this story stands for is worth your time. I didn't sleep again, but this time it was different. The first night without sleep had been grief, the hollow, directionless kind that sits on your chest and doesn't move. This night was something else. This night, I sat in the dark of the shop with the burner phone in my hand, and my mind running hard and clean the way an engine runs when everything is finally aligned and the fuel is good and there's open road ahead. Ethan called back at 6 in the morning, exactly when he said he would. I'd made coffee. I was sitting on the stool at the back bench with the shop door cracked 2 inches for air, watching the sky outside go from black to the particular bruised purple that comes just before sunrise in East LA. When the phone rang, I picked it up before the second vibration. "I'm here," I said. "I know." A breath. "How much did Sandra tell you?" "Enough to understand the shape of it, not all the details." "Okay." Another breath, steadying like a man organizing his thoughts before a long explanation. "Then, let me fill in the rest." He talked for almost 40 minutes. I didn't interrupt. I just listened the way I listen when a customer describes a problem with their vehicle, letting the whole picture form before I start looking for the broken part. 3 weeks before the wedding, Ethan had found a folder on Vanessa's laptop while she was sleeping. He wasn't looking for anything. He'd been borrowing her charger and the screen had woken up, and there it was. A document with his name on it and Richard's name and numbers that didn't add up to anything a fiancé should have. "I didn't wake her up," Ethan said. "I took pictures of everything with my phone, and I closed the laptop and I went back to bed, and I lay there until 4 in the morning thinking about what to do." A pause. "I thought about calling you." "Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't know yet how deep Richard was in it. And Richard has been your lawyer for 15 years, Dad. I didn't want to blow up your life over something I hadn't verified yet." His voice tightened. "So I called Sandra instead." He'd walked into the FBI field office on Wilshire 3 days later with the photographs on his phone and a flash drive containing 6 months of financial communications he'd quietly pulled from Richard's shared document system, access he had, because Richard had made him a secondary contact on the Mercer family estate account years ago. A door Richard had left open and apparently forgotten about. "The Sandra said they needed more," Ethan continued. "They had circumstantial evidence enough to watch, not enough to arrest. What they needed was proof of criminal intent, an overt act." He paused. "So we made a decision. I went ahead with the wedding. I gave Richard the opportunity to do what we both knew he was going to do." My chest tightened. "You used yourself as bait." "I used the situation," Ethan said carefully. "There's a difference. I knew what Richard was planning. Sandra knew. The question was whether Richard would actually move, whether he'd cross from conspiracy into action. And he did." His voice went flat and hard in a way I hadn't heard from him before. "The night before we were supposed to leave for the honeymoon, I found the brake line on my truck. Cut. Not failed, cut. Clean, deliberate, exactly where it would cause maximum damage at highway speed." I put my hand over my eyes. "Ethan, eis witan made menustaf bond." "I'm okay, Dad. I found it in time. I found it because I was looking for it." He exhaled. "I called Sandra. We had 4 hours. It sounds impossible, But Sandra told me later her team had been running contingency scenarios for weeks ever since Ethan first contacted them. They had an identical vehicle on standby, same year, same color. The plates were transferred under emergency federal authorization. We put the original truck on the route Richard expected, and I got into a federal vehicle and didn't look back. Oh, the fire, I said slowly. The car on Mulholland was a controlled burn. Sandra's team pulled the driver before it went. Everything else, the police response, the identification process, the timeline, all of it was coordinated in advance. Another pause. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. The funeral. The all of it. If there had been any other way, don't. My voice came out harder than I intended. Don't apologize for staying alive. A long silence on the line. Then, okay, where are you? I asked. Actually, you can tell me that much. My safe house outside Reno, he said. FBI set it up food-secured internet connection, a burner line. They've been covering everything because I'm a cooperative witness in an active federal case. I'm not just hiding Dad. I've been building from the inside, pulling additional documentation, cross-referencing Richard's offshore account activity with the SEC timeline Sandra gave me. A hint of something almost like his old energy came into his voice. I found 3 more accounts last week he doesn't know we know about. Despite everything, I felt the corner of my mouth move. Your mother's son, I said. Your son too, he said quietly. Dad, I need you to do something. Sandra tells me you've already agreed to play the grieving father who's breaking down. I need you to take it one step further. I need you to meet with Vanessa. Let her come to you. Let her believe she's winning. And what am I supposed to do when she's in front of me? Listen, he said. Watch, she'll slip. She always slips. Sandra has 14 months of surveillance that proves it. When she thinks she's in control, she gets comfortable. And comfortable people talk too much. I thought about those red fingernails. That practiced grip when she took my hands at Richard's office. The way her eyes had tracked that piece of paper without her head moving at all. She already slipped once, I said. At the reading, she knew not to take the address. I know, Sandra told me. His voice warmed fractionally. You noticed it. Of course you did. Before I could answer, the shop door rattled. Jimmy's knock, 3 quick 2, slow the code we'd been using since the day after Palmdale. I crossed the floor and opened the door 2 inches. Jimmy's face was tight. He kept his voice just above a whisper. Boss, there's a white Mercedes parked across the street. Been there 15 minutes. Engine off. He paused. It's her. I looked back at the burner phone in my hand. Ethan, I said quietly. She's here. A beat of silence. Then very steadily, then go. Be the man they think you are. And Dad. His voice dropped to something I had to press the phone hard against my ear to catch. Don't let her see that you're not afraid of her. Not yet. I set the phone face down on the bench. I rolled down my sleeves, straightened my collar, ran one hand through my hair. Then I walked to the front of the shop and unlocked the door. She was better than I expected. I'd been telling myself the whole walk from the back of the shop to the front door that I knew what she was. I had the FBI file. I had Frank's photographs. I had 14 months of Sandra Ortiz's surveillance distilled into a single morning conversation that had laid out Diana Reeves like a blueprint. I knew exactly what I was walking toward. It didn't matter. She was still better than I expected. Vanessa stood on the sidewalk outside the shop, in a black wrap dress and low heels, her hair down her face arranged into something that looked so much like genuine grief that for one half-second, one terrible, disorienting half-second, my chest ached the way it had at the funeral. She'd done something subtle to her eyes that made them look swollen, like she'd been crying in the car on the way over. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and when she saw me come out, her face crumpled just enough. Thomas. She said my name the way Maggie used to say it, soft with the weight on the second syllable. I hope it's okay that I came. I couldn't be alone anymore. Come in, I said. I kept my voice gentle and my face loose and opened the face of a man with nothing left to protect. I just made coffee. She followed me inside. I'd spent 20 years watching Ethan learn to read people from the shop floor, watching him figure out that the customer who comes in aggressive is scared, and the one who comes in too friendly has already decided not to pay. Vanessa walked into Mercer Auto the way someone walks into a room they've already mapped. Her eyes moved quick, precise, a single sweep of the space that took in the tool wall, the bays, the F-150 in the corner, and then settled back into grief so fast that if I hadn't been looking for it, I would have missed it completely. I poured 2 cups and brought them to the folding table near the office door. She sat across from me and wrapped both hands around her mug and looked down at the surface of the coffee. "I keep waking up in the middle of the night," she said softly, reaching for him, and then I remember. "I know that feeling," I said, and I did. The difference was that mine was real. "I don't even know how to begin dealing with all the practical things." She continued shaking her head slowly. "Richard has been wonderful, but the paperwork, the accounts, there's this trust document that Ethan apparently set up a few weeks before the wedding, and I can't even make myself read through it properly because every time I try, I just..." She stopped, pressed her fingers to her lips. My blood went very still. Trust document. Richard hadn't mentioned any trust document at the preliminary reading. He'd talked about the will, the estate, the probate timeline. Not once had he used the words trust document, and Ethan certainly hadn't mentioned it to me, because as far as Richard knew, Thomas Mercer didn't know that document existed. But Vanessa knew. I kept my face exactly where it was open, tired, sad, and I let the silence stretch for exactly as long as grief would stretch it before I spoke. "He was always so organized," I said quietly. "Even as a kid, used to drive me crazy how organized he was." Vanessa smiled, small practiced. "He was." From the far corner of the shop behind the shelving unit near the air compressor, Jimmy moved almost imperceptibly. I'd positioned him there before she arrived, phone in hand, camera, running angle covering the full table. He was good at stillness, Jimmy. 8 years of working in tight spaces under vehicles teaches you how to make yourself disappear. I let Vanessa talk for another 20 minutes. She was careful. Careful enough that the trust document didn't come up again, careful enough that nothing else slipped through. But I'd heard it, and Jimmy had heard it, and the mic Frank had installed in the front office wall 2 days ago had heard every word. When she finally stood to leave, she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "I want us to be family, Thomas," she said. "Whatever happens with the legal things, I want you to know that I think of you as family." I looked at her hand on mine, those red nails fresh and perfect. "That means a lot," I said. I walked her to the door. She turned once on the sidewalk, gave me a look that was calibrated to land somewhere between sorrow and warmth, and then got into the white Mercedes and drove away. I stood in the doorway until the car turned the corner. "Boss?" Jimmy materialized from behind the shelving unit, phone in hand. "I got all of it. Full video, clean audio. The trust document line is in there, clear as anything." "Good." I put my hand on his shoulder briefly. "Send it to the number Sandra gave you. Encrypt it." He was already moving. I walked back through the shop toward the F-150 in the far bay, and I stood there for a moment, looking at the truck, at the familiar dent on the rear bumper that Ethan had put there backing out of a parking garage 3 years ago and never fixed because he thought it gave the truck character. I crouched down. The GPS unit was stuck to the inside of the rear frame rail, small, black, magnetic. It was the kind you could order online for, under $100, the kind that pinged a location every 30 seconds to a receiver up to 2 miles away. It was still warm from recent placement. She'd done it in the 2 minutes she stood outside before I came out. I straightened up slowly. Gluing a tracking device to someone's vehicle without their consent was a federal offense under the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. Richard's team had just handed Sandra Ortiz something she hadn't even asked for. I pulled out the burner phone and typed a single message to the number Ethan had given me. "GPS on the truck, rear frame rail, still warm." The response came back in under a minute. "Don't touch it. We'll use it. I read it twice. Then I looked at the GPS unit one more time, this small black thing that was supposed to lead them straight to me, and I thought about what Frank had said on the road back from Palmdale. "They've got nothing, because you listened to your son." Not nothing anymore. Sandra called at 7 the next morning, not a text, a call which meant something had moved overnight. I was already at the bench when the phone rang halfway through my second cup of coffee and a conversation with Frank about whether the GPS on the F-150 was a liability or an asset. Frank's position was that anything your enemy puts on your vehicle is information about what your enemy is thinking. I was coming around to his point of view. "We need to meet," Sandra said. No greeting. Not the field office, the coffee shop on Glendale Avenue 2 blocks east of the shop. 45 minutes. She was already there when I arrived in a corner booth with her back to the wall and a cup of black coffee she hadn't touched. I'd called Frank from the parking structure while Sandra was pulling the second folder together. He'd driven over without asking a single question the way Frank always did. He slid in beside me. Sandra looked at him once, then apparently decided he'd earned his seat because she opened her folder without comment. "Jimmy's video from yesterday is solid," she said. "The trust document reference is on record. Combined with the GPS unit, which our technical team documented in place before dawn this morning, we now have physical evidence of coordinated surveillance against you." She turned a page. "I want to walk you through what we know about the financial structure, because you're going to need to understand it before this is over." She laid 3 documents on the table, clean copies, edges sharp. The kind of paperwork that had been handled by people who knew exactly how it would look in a courtroom. "Richard Cole maintains an escrow account in the Cayman Islands," she said. "Established 2017, routed through a shell company registered in Delaware. 2 weeks before Ethan's wedding, that account received a wire transfer of $280,000 from a secondary account linked to Diana Reeves." She tapped the page. "In federal law, a wire transfer used to facilitate a crime, including murder for hire, constitutes wire fraud under Title 18 of the U.S. Code. Combined with the conspiracy charge, Richard is looking at mandatory minimums that would put him away until he's 80 years old." Frank let out a slow breath beside me. "The trust document Jimmy recorded, Vanessa referencing," Sandra continued, "is fraudulent. We've had a forensic accountant reviewing it for the past week. The administrative costs and legal fees buried in the language amount to approximately 40% of Ethan's total estate value. All of it routes back through accounts connected to Richard." She looked up. "Standard probate attorneys would eventually catch it, but eventually was all Richard needed enough time for Ethan's company to be dissolved. His work buried Diana offshore." "It's not the first time he's done this," I said. Sandra closed the folder. She looked at me the way she'd looked at the Sacramento page last time, like she was deciding how much weight to put on the next sentence. "Sacramento, 2019, she said. "A man named Gerald Whitmore, 61 years old, retired engineer, single father. His daughter was building an investment analytics platform that would have directly competed with 3 of Richard's major clients." She paused. "Whitmore died in a boating accident on Lake Tahoe in March of that year. His daughter walked away from the project 4 months later. She told people she couldn't focus after losing her father." Sandra's jaw tightened by a fraction. "We believe she was approached and threatened. We could never prove it. Richard's attorneys kept everything at arm's length, and the case went cold inside of 8 months." The coffee in front of me had gone cold. I didn't notice until I reached for it. "Gerald Whitmore had a daughter who walked away," I said. "Ethan had a father who walked into an FBI office." "That's the difference," Sandra said. "That's the only difference." Frank put both forearms on the table and leaned forward. "What's Richard's move right now? He knows Thomas went to Palmdale and came back. He knows Vanessa visited the shop. What's he waiting for?" "He's not waiting," Sandra said. She reached into the folder one more time and laid a single page on the table. "This came across my desk at 11 o'clock last night. Richard filed a formal complaint with the LA County District Attorney's Office yesterday evening. He's alleging that Thomas Mercer engaged in a conspiracy to defraud Ethan's estate prior to his death, using falsified financial documents and threats." She let that sit for a moment. "The documents he's submitted are the ones from Palmdale, the ones with your name on them, Thomas, the ones we photographed and left exactly where they were." The booth went very tight and very small. "He's framing me through the DA," I said. "He's trying to." Sandra's voice didn't waver. "The complaint has legal weight because the documents look convincing to someone who doesn't know they're fabricated. If the DA moves on it, you could be looking at a formal interview request within 72 hours, and Richard knows that an official interview creates a record that damages your credibility in any subsequent proceeding." 72 hours, Frank said flatly. 72 hours, Sandra confirmed. I sat back in the booth. Through the window behind Sandra's head, Glendale Avenue was doing what it always does at 8 in the morning, moving indifferent, everyone on their way, somewhere that had nothing to do with any of this. "There's something else," Sandra said. She was watching me with that careful steadiness she'd had from the beginning, the look of someone who respected you enough not to soften what needed to be said. "I've been trying to understand why Richard moved on Ethan when he did. The estate value alone doesn't justify the risk he's taking. He's a man with 20 years of careful operation. He doesn't act unless the math is overwhelming." She opened to a page near the back of the folder. Our financial analysts have been cross-referencing the SEC investigation timeline with Ethan's company development schedule. Thomas, do you know exactly what software Ethan was building at Mercer Logic? Oh, no. The question landed somewhere in my chest. I thought about that evening in the garage. Ethan leaning against the workbench with his beer electric with something he couldn't fully say yet. The way people protect their money, their real assets, it's broken. What we're building is going to fix that. He told me it was something big, I said slowly. Something that would change how people protect their financial assets. He said he couldn't tell me everything yet. Sandra nodded. The software Ethan has been developing for the past 2 years is an automated fraud detection system. It uses pattern recognition to identify falsified financial reporting, hidden account structures, and irregular wire transfers, the kind of activity that's very difficult for human auditors to catch, but relatively straightforward for the right algorithm. She held my gaze. If that software reaches the market, Richard Cole's entire offshore network becomes visible. Every hidden account, every falsified transfer, every client he's been protecting for 20 years. The pieces dropped into place one by one, the way they do when you finally find the right diagnostic angle on an engine that's been misfiring for weeks. Task 1. Ethan in the garage, a secret project, something big, something he couldn't tell me yet. Task 5. Diana Reeves's file, high-value proprietary technology. Task 7. Sandra in her office SEC investigation since 2021. And now sitting in a corner booth on Glendale Avenue with 72 hours on the clock, all of it finally resolved into a single clear image. He doesn't want Ethan's money, I said. No, Sandra said. He wants Ethan's software buried. That's what we believe, yes. Frank made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, and set it down. I looked at Sandra. Then we have 72 hours to give him something he wants more than either one, I said. Sandra leaned forward slightly. For the first time since I'd walked into her office 4 days ago, something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but the closest thing to it I'd seen from her. Tell me what you're thinking, she said. Frank's house was 3 miles from the shop, a single-story bungalow on a quiet street in Monterey Park with a vegetable garden in the backyard that he maintained with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else in his life. He grew tomatoes, bell peppers, and one stubborn row of cilantro that he claimed never grew right, but replanted every spring anyway. He gave me the guest room without being asked. Clean sheets, a reading lamp, a window that looked out onto the garden. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before I lay down, and when I finally did, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the neighborhood sounds, a dog somewhere, a car passing the distant pulse of a television through the wall, and tried to remember the last time I'd slept somewhere that wasn't my own house. The night Maggie died, I'd fallen asleep in the hospital chair beside her bed and woken up to find the room had changed in the way rooms change when the person who made them worth being in is no longer there. I didn't sleep at Frank's house either. By 6 in the morning, I was in his kitchen making coffee, and by 7, I was sitting at his kitchen table with Sandra's folder open in front of me, reading through the Sacramento case notes for the 3rd time. Gerald Whitmore, 61 years old, a man who'd spent 30 years building something, and then one morning went out on the water and didn't come back. His daughter had walked away from everything he'd worked for. I thought about that for a long time. Frank came in at 7:30, in his robe, took one look at the folder on his kitchen table, and went to pour himself a coffee without comment. He sat across from me, and we drank in the way that men who've known each other long enough drink coffee without needing to fill the space. You look like you've been up all night, he said finally. I have. You look like you're thinking about something that's eating you alive. I am. I closed the folder. What if we get this wrong? Frank, what if we go into that office with a USB full of nothing, and Richard has something we haven't accounted for? What if there's a move he's planned that Sandra hasn't seen yet? Frank set his cup down. He looked at me steadily across the table, not with reassurance which I would have seen through, but with the particular directness of a man who'd spent 2 decades in rooms where things went wrong. Then we deal with it, he said, the same way you deal with an engine that throws a surprise on the lift. You don't quit. You find the next right thing, and you do that. I pressed my palm flat on the table. I keep thinking about Gerald Whitmore's daughter. She had no one in her corner. She lost her father, and then she lost everything he built, and then some man in a suit walked away clean. I know. That cannot happen again. My voice came out harder than I intended. Not to another family, not because we hesitated. Frank nodded, just once, and that was enough. Jimmy called at noon. "Boss, they came back." His voice was low and tight. Same guy from before, the one I recognized from the car outside the shop 2 weeks before the wedding, Detective Morrison. He had a partner this time. They stayed 20 minutes, walked the whole floor, asked if there was any paperwork in the office related to Ethan's estate. A pause. I told them all the paperwork was with Richard Cole. I said you'd been too upset to deal with any of it. "Perfect," I said. "Exactly right." "Ah, boss." His voice dropped lower. "They looked at the F-150, spent about 3 minutes near it. I think they were checking if the GPS was still there." "It is," I said. "Don't touch anything. Act normal." I ended the call and stood at Frank's kitchen window, looking out at the tomato plants in the garden, their heavy fruit red and splitting in the September heat. Richard's man had come back to verify the GPS was in place, which meant Richard was watching the truck, which meant as long as the truck stayed at the shop, Richard believed Thomas Mercer was somewhere nearby, grieving and losing his mind, and right where they wanted him. Good. I went to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the frame photograph I'd brought from the shop, the one I kept on the shelf above the workbench. Thomas and Maggie and Ethan, maybe 12 years old, standing in front of the shop the day we repainted the sign. Maggie had one arm around Ethan and one hand on my chest, and she was laughing at something I'd said, and I couldn't remember anymore what the joke was, but I remembered the sound of her laughing and the way it made the whole day feel lighter than it had any right to. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," I said out loud. The guest room was small and still and didn't offer any opinions. "I keep running the plan through my head, and it makes sense on paper, but you always said I was better with machines than with people. And this is very much about people." I ran my thumb across the photograph. Across Ethan's face, 12 years old, squinting into the sun, already too smart for his own good. "He's alive, Maggie. He did something incredibly dangerous and incredibly brave, and he's alive." My throat tightened. "He sat beside me the whole night you died. Did you know that he didn't say much? He just held my hand and stayed. I never told him how much that meant because you know how I am with that kind of thing." I pressed my lips together hard. "I'm going to tell him. When this is over, I'm going to tell him." The burner phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Ethan's number, but the tone was different, crisper, more direct. Sandra had taken over the line. Richard's attorney contacted the DA office this morning to follow up on the complaint. They're pushing for a formal interview by end of week. We need to move Thursday. Thomas, call Richard tomorrow morning. Tell him you found something in the shop, something Ethan left behind. Tell him you need to talk. He'll ask to meet at his office. Say yes. I read it twice. Then a second message 30 seconds later. Ethan's voice again. I could tell by the rhythm of the words the way he used contractions. "The USB needs to be real enough that he reaches for it. It doesn't need to have anything on it. Trust me, Dad. He'll do the rest himself. He always does." I set the phone down on the nightstand next to the photograph. Outside, the September sun was burning the last of the morning, cool off Frank's garden. The tomatoes were red and heavy and ready. I picked up the burner phone again and typed one word back. Understood. Then I lay back on the guest room bed, closed my eyes, and for the first time in 6 days, I slept. I called Richard at 7 in the morning. 2 rings. He picked up like he'd been waiting. "Thomas." The warmth was immediate, practice seamless. "I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up?" "I'm not well," I said. I let my voice go rough and unsteady, which took less effort than it should have. "Richard, I found something in the shop, something Ethan left behind. I don't know what it is, I don't know if it matters, but I'm scared to open it alone." A pause carefully timed. "Can we meet today if possible? I just need someone I trust." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 1 second too long. "Of course," Richard said. "Come to the office, 2 o'clock. I hung up and sat in Frank's kitchen with the phone in my hand and my coffee going cold in front of me. He said yes, immediately. I told Frank, who was standing at the counter pretending to read the newspaper. Didn't hesitate. "He never hesitates when he thinks he's winning," Frank said without looking up. "That's when men like that make mistakes." Sandra called 20 minutes later. The arrest warrant was signed by a federal judge at 6 this morning. She said, her voice clipped and precise. "I've coordinated with Century City Building Security. They'll cut camera access to the 12th floor on my signal. SWAT is staged 2 blocks out. Everything runs on your timeline, Thomas. The moment Richard incriminates himself on that recording, you give us the word. How will you know when? I asked. We'll be listening to every word in real time, she said. When I hear enough, I move. You won't have to signal anything. Just keep him talking. I drove to the shop first. I stood for a long moment in front of the door. Before I unlocked it, looking at the sign my father had hung in 1987. The paint faded now, but the letters still solid. Mercer Auto. Honest work, fair price. My father had painted those words himself, standing on a ladder on a Saturday morning, while my mother held the base and told him it was crooked. He'd repainted the whole thing twice before she was satisfied. I went inside and found a USB drive in the desk drawer, blank 8 gigabytes, the kind that comes in a pack of 5 from the drugstore. I held it in my palm for a moment, just plastic and metal, nothing on it but empty space. Richard didn't know that. More importantly, Richard couldn't afford to find out without revealing exactly why he wanted to know. I pocketed the USB and drove to Century City. Richard's receptionist smiled and told me to go right in. The 12th floor was quiet, too quiet the way places get when people have been told to make themselves scarce. I noticed it the way you notice an engine running, with one cylinder, misfiring. Something in the rhythm was off too smooth in the wrong places. Richard stood when I entered. He came around the desk with both hands extended, and his grip was warm and firm, and I felt something cold move through my chest, because this was the same man who had sat beside me in a hospital corridor 11 years ago, and held my hand when Maggie's first diagnosis came back, and I had trusted him then, with everything I had, and he had been keeping a ledger the whole time. Thomas! He steered me toward the chair across from his desk. Sit down. Tell me what you found. I sat. I reached into my jacket pocket slowly, deliberately, and placed the USB drive on the desk between us. Richard looked at it. His eyes moved across that small plastic rectangle with an intensity that he almost managed to keep off his face. Ethan left this in the F-150, I said. The old truck, the one that's been sitting in my bay. I only found it this morning taped under the dash. I looked up at him. I don't know what's on it, Richard. I'm afraid to look. What if it's something that makes everything worse? Richard leaned back in his chair, his fingers laced together on the desk in front of him, and I watched him make the calculation, the same calculation I'd watched him make at the preliminary reading at the funeral every time we'd spoken since Ethan died. He was deciding how much to give, how much to take, how far to push. He didn't reach for the USB. That told me everything. A man with nothing to hide picks up the drive and opens it. A man who needs that drive to be handed over voluntarily, because voluntary transfer implies acknowledgement, implies cooperation, implies that Thomas Mercer understood what he was giving away. That man leans back and waits. He doesn't want to open it, I thought. He wants me to open it. He wants me to be the one who acts. I think, Richard said carefully, that before we look at anything on that drive, we should talk about where things stand, legally, for your protection. He held my gaze with the steady confidence of a man who had never once considered that the room might not be on his side. There are some complications, Thomas, with the estate, with some financial irregularities that have come to light. His voice dropped half a register into the register of a man sharing something reluctantly. I want to help you navigate this, but I need to know that you're willing to be guided, that you trust the process. My hands were flat on my knees under the desk. Keep him talking. I trust you, Richard, I said. I always have. The smile that moved across his face was the most expensive thing in the room. Good, he said. Then let me tell you what I think we should do. Richard poured the whiskey without asking if I wanted any. It was a single malt, the kind that comes in a bottle with a name I couldn't pronounce and a price tag I didn't want to think about. He set the glass in front of me with the practiced ease of a man who understood that alcohol and generosity were instruments same as anything else. And he settled back into his chair with his own glass and looked at me across the desk with the expression of a doctor about to deliver news he'd been sitting on for a while. Thomas, he said, I'm going to be honest with you because I think you deserve honesty right now, more than you deserve comfort. I appreciate that, I said. There are financial irregularities in Ethan's estate that are going to cause problems. He swirled the whiskey once. Documents have surfaced. I don't know where they came from, and I don't need to. That suggests Ethan may have been involved in some transactions that weren't entirely above board. Transfers, agreements with third parties. He paused. If these documents reach the DA's office in their current form, the investigation won't stop with Ethan. It will extend to anyone connected to the estate, including you. I let my hands tighten around the glass, let my jaw work like a man trying to hold himself together. What are you saying, Richard? I'm saying I can make this go away. He leaned forward, both forearms on the desk, dropping the performance of distance and going straight to the performance of intimacy. $200,000, cash structured in a way that leaves no footprint. You sign a statement withdrawing any interest in the estate proceedings, no contest, no involvement, clean exit. In return, those documents disappear, and the DA receives a revised report indicating the initial complaint was filed in error. The whiskey glass in my hand was cold. The room was cold. Everything was very clear and very still. And Ethan, I said, what about what happened to him? Richard's expression shifted into something that was almost sorrow. Ethan is gone, Thomas. What we do now is protect what's left, protect you, protect the legacy of the family he built. He held my gaze with the steady confidence of a man who had never once sat across from someone who knew exactly what he was. Sometimes the most important thing a father can do is accept what he cannot change and secure what he still can. I set the glass down on the desk. I looked at Richard Cole, at the silver at his temples, and the tailored suit and the hands that had never once in 15 years shown a callus or a scar, and I felt something clarify inside me, the way a foggy windshield clarifies when the defroster finally kicks in, clean and sudden and complete. I'm just a mechanic, I said. My voice came out quiet and even. You know that about me, Richard. Always have. I look at things and I figure out what's broken. I reached into my jacket pocket, not for the USB this time, for my phone. And I've been looking at you for 10 days now, and I finally understand exactly which part failed. I pressed play. Richard's own voice filled the office from 3 minutes ago, clean and clear through the recording Sandra's team had been pulling in real time since I walked through the door. $200,000, cash structured in a way that leaves no footprint. You sign a statement withdrawing any interest. The color left Richard's face in a single wave, top to bottom, like water draining out of a tank. He stopped, started again. You can't, that recording isn't fully admissible in federal court, I said. Title III wiretap order signed by a federal judge 2 days ago. Everything said in this room, since I walked in, has been relayed in real time to Special Agent Sandra Ortiz of the FBI. I stood up slowly, the way I stand up after a long time under a vehicle, careful, deliberate, feeling every one of my 66 years. The USB is empty, Richard. There's nothing on it. There never was. You just told a federal recording that you'd make evidence disappear and pay me to walk away from a murder investigation. That's obstruction of justice on top of everything else they already have. Richard stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the credenza behind him. His face had gone past pale into something I didn't have a word for, the face of a man whose entire architecture of control has just been pulled out from underneath him all at once. You have no idea what you've done, he said, and his voice had lost every layer of warmth and craft and was now just cold and cornered and dangerous. You're a 66-year-old mechanic from East LA. Do you understand what I can bring down on you? The people I know. You think one FBI recording ends this? No, I said, but it starts it. His hand moved to the desk drawer. My heart rate spiked hard and fast. I didn't step back. I'd spent 40 years in a shop where the wrong move at the wrong moment meant losing a hand. And the first thing you learn is that flinching gets you hurt worse than standing still. Richard pulled out a small black remote. Compact, 2 buttons, the kind of thing you'd overlook on a desk full of legal files. He pressed the top button. From the door behind me came the sound of magnetic locks engaging, a solid, definitive thunk that echoed off the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out behind Richard's head, 12 floors of Los Angeles, going about its business in the late afternoon sun, completely indifferent to the two of us standing on either side of a desk with everything between us now in the open. Richard straightened his jacket. Some of the control came back into his face, not much, but enough to make him more dangerous than he'd been a moment ago, because desperate men with nothing left to lose move differently than confident men. You're not leaving this room, he said, until we've reached a different kind of understanding. I looked at him across the desk. Richard, I said, the only thing left to understand is that you're already out of moves. And then the window behind him exploded inward. The window didn't shatter the way windows shatter in movies. It came apart in a single controlled implosion, a precise, deliberate breach that sent safety glass cascading inward in a glittering wave, and before the last fragment hit the carpet, 4 FBI agents in tactical gear were inside the room, moving with the kind of coordinated efficiency that made it clear they had been standing on that ledge for the better part of an hour, waiting for exactly this moment. Richard spun toward the window, then toward the door, which opened simultaneously from the outside building. Security had cut the magnetic lock on Sandra's signal, and Sandra herself walked through it with 2 more agents flanking her and her badge already out. Richard Cole. Her voice filled the room without effort, the way voices do when they've said these words enough times to mean every syllable. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Richard didn't run. I'd half expected him to make some last desperate move toward the window or the door, or just toward me, anything to delay what was already finished. But he didn't. He stood in the center of his own office with the city spread out behind him, and the agents moving around him like water around a stone. And something in his face went through several expressions very quickly before settling on the one that was left when everything else had burned away. Just fear. Plain unadorned $60 suits, fear the kind that doesn't have any polish left on it. An agent stepped behind him with handcuffs, and Richard flinched, actually flinched, the first uncontrolled movement I'd seen from him in 15 years. And I thought about Gerald Whitmore on Lake Tahoe. I thought about a daughter who walked away from everything her father built. I thought about the Sacramento case file with its cold bureaucratic language that stood in for a family that never got their version of this moment. The cuffs clicked shut. Sandra's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and looked up at me across the room. Bel Air team confirms, she said. Diana Reeves is in custody. Simultaneous arrest 12 minutes ago. The breath I let out had been sitting in my chest for 10 days. Richard's head turned toward me. His eyes found mine across the width of the office, past the agents and the overturned chair and the whiskey glass still sitting on the desk where I'd left it, and for one long moment we just looked at each other. This man I'd trusted for 15 years, and the 66-year-old mechanic from East LA he'd decided was easy. You should have left the truck alone, I said. It wasn't angry, it was just true. They walked him out. The office went quiet in the sudden specific way that rooms go quiet after something large has moved through them. 2 agents remained working the room, methodically bagging the remote, photographing the desk, cataloging. I stood near the window, where the night air was coming through the breach cool and carrying the distant sound of the city, and I looked down at my hands. 40 years of work in them, scars from things that had gone wrong and healed imperfectly. Calluses built up in layers over decades, each one a record of a day I'd shown up and done what needed to be done. These hands had rebuilt engines that other mechanics had given up on. They'd held Maggie's hand in a hospital room, while the world contracted to the size of a bed and a window, and the sound of her breathing. They'd signed the paperwork that turned a patch of concrete in East LA into something Ethan could grow up around. Those are good hands, Sandra said. I looked up. She was standing a few feet away, jacket straight in the operational focus of the last 2 weeks, settling into something quieter now that the machinery had run its course. They're old hands, I said. It's same thing sometimes. She tucked her badge back into her jacket. Richard won't make bail. Federal conspiracy to commit murder judges don't look kindly on that, regardless of how good your attorneys are. The financial charges alone carry mandatory minimums that make the rest academic. She paused. We'll need your formal statement in the next 48 hours. After that, the case moves to the federal prosecutor, and you step back. And Ethan's company. The TRO gets lifted as soon as the court receives our filing, probably end of week. Ethan's legal team can move to restore full operational control from there. Something shifted in her expression. He's been working this whole time, you know, even from the safe house. Our analysts say the documentation he pulled together from Reno is going to be the spine of the prosecution case. I nodded. My throat was doing something complicated that I was choosing to ignore. Sandra. I looked at her directly. Thank you for keeping him safe, for keeping this moving when you didn't have to. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she said, he called us because he trusted that we'd do the job. The least we could do was deserve it. She reached into her jacket and produced her car keys. I have a vehicle downstairs. There's somewhere I think you need to be. We rode the elevator down in the particular silence of two people who have just been through something they will both be processing for a long time. The lobby was quiet, building security had cleared the floor, and the marble atrium with its expensive lighting felt strange and vast and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened 12 stories above it. Outside, the night air hit me full in the face. September in LA still warmed the smell of the city doing what it always does. Exhaust and jasmine and something cooking somewhere, and underneath it all that particular dry warmth that never really leaves even after the sun goes down. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, with my eyes closed. 10 days! 10 days since Jimmy's phone call at 2 in the morning. 10 days since I had stood on Mulholland Drive and watched what I thought was the end of everything I had left. Sandra touched my arm lightly. "You ready?" I opened my eyes. "Yeah," I said. "Let's go." The safe house was in Burbank, a quiet street, single story, the kind of neighborhood where people keep their yards tidy and their porch lights on, and don't ask questions about the cars that come and go at odd hours. Sandra pulled up in front without cutting the engine and looked at me. "Third door on the left," she said. "He's been waiting since 6. I got out of the car. The night was warm and still. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler was running, the only sound on the whole street. I walked up the path to the front door and stood there for a moment, with my hand raised to knock, and I had to stop. Had to just stop and breathe, because my chest was doing something that 40 years of keeping it together had not prepared me for. My son was on the other side of this door. I knocked twice. Footsteps, close quick like someone who'd been pacing near the door for the last hour. A lock turned, the door opened. Ethan looked like 10 days of not sleeping and not eating enough, and carrying something too heavy for one person to carry alone. He was thinner, his jaw sharp with new stubble, his eyes reddened at the edges. He had on an old flannel shirt I recognized from 3 Christmases ago, and he was standing in the doorway with his hands at his sides and his face doing everything all at once, relief and guilt and exhaustion and something that was trying very hard to be steady and wasn't quite managing it. We looked at each other for about 2 seconds. Then Ethan's face crumpled completely and he said, "Dad," in a voice that had nothing left in it, and I stepped forward and put my arms around my son and held on. He broke apart the way people break apart when they've been holding something together too long and the last support finally gives. His shoulders heaved and he grabbed the back of my jacket with both fists like he was afraid I'd disappear. And he was crying the way I hadn't heard him cry since he was 7 years old, and fell off his bicycle and split his chin open on the driveway, that total unguarded childlike crying that has no dignity in it and doesn't need any. I held him tighter. "You're okay," I said into the top of his head. My voice came out wrecked. "You're okay, I've got you." "I'm sorry, Dad." The words came out broken, barely intelligible. "I'm so sorry. The funeral, watching you go through that and not being able to. I wanted to call you every single day, and Sandra said I couldn't, and I understood why, but it was understand wanindesemt. Ethan," I pulled back enough to hold his face in both my hands, these beat-up, oil-stained 66-year-old hands that had fixed 10,000 things, and never once managed to fix the things that mattered most. His eyes were red and streaming, and he looked about 23 years old. "Listen to me. You're alive. Everything else we can handle." He pressed his lips together hard and nodded, once, twice, getting himself back. I steered him inside. The safe house was spare but not unkind. A couch, a kitchen table covered in laptops and printed documents, a whiteboard on one wall covered in Richard's financial network drawn out in colored marker. Ethan had been living inside this case the same way I'd been living inside it from the outside, and seeing it laid out like that made something in my chest ache in a way that was almost pride. We sat at the kitchen table. An agent appeared briefly with 2 cups of coffee and then disappeared in the way FBI agents apparently learned to disappear, and we sat across from each other with our hands wrapped around warm cups and the whole 10 days between us. "Tell me something I don't know," I said. Ethan laughed short and raw and real. "There's a lot of that. Start anywhere." He told me about Reno, about the safe house outside the city, smaller than this one, a twin bed and a secured laptop, and a FBI-issue phone and not much else. About the first 3 nights when he'd lain awake running the decision tree in his head, whether he'd made the right call, whether there had been another way, whether putting me through a funeral was something he'd ever be able to justify to himself. "I looked at pictures," he said, "of you, of Mom, the 3 of us at Santa Monica. You remember that trip the summer before she got sick? You burned the hot dogs, and Mom ate them anyway and told you they were perfect. She was a terrible liar, I said. The worst. His smile was small and sore around the edges. I looked at that picture probably 400 times in 10 days. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. He turned his palm up and gripped my fingers the way he'd grip my jacket at the door, hard, like something he wasn't ready to let go of yet. I wasn't going to make him. She would have found a way to ground both of us for this whole mess, I said. Ethan let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob, and pressed his free hand over his eyes. She would have been furious, and then she would have made us both sit down and eat something and told us we were idiots and she was proud of us and never discussed it again. That's exactly right, I said. The burner phone in my pocket buzzed. I pulled it out. Jimmy, I put it on speaker. Boss. His voice was tight with something that wasn't worry, something looser than that. Relief, maybe wearing worry's clothes because that's all it knew how to wear. I saw it on the news. They're showing the footage outside the building. Richard Cole in handcuffs. A pause. You okay? Better than okay, Jimmy. Good. Another pause, the kind that means someone is deciding whether to say the next thing. I kept the shop running, checked the F-150, turned off the lights. You know, the usual. I know, I said. Starting next week, your usual comes with a raise. Silence on the line. Then roughly, you don't have to do that, boss. I know I don't have to, I said. That's why I'm doing it. After I hung up, Ethan sat back in his chair and looked at me with his eyes still red, but something settled now behind them. Something that had been wound very tight for a very long time, finally releasing degree by degree into the quiet of this plain room in Burbank, with the sprinkler still running somewhere outside. Dad, he said. His voice had gone serious in a different way than before. Not guilty, not relieved, careful. There's something I haven't told you yet, about Vanessa, about the real reason Richard chose her for this. He leaned forward, about what they were actually after. I set my coffee cup down. Tell me, I said. We talked until 2 in the morning, not about the case, not about Richard or Diana or the next steps or the federal prosecutor's timeline. We talked about Maggie, about the shop, about a summer road trip we'd taken when Ethan was 16, just the two of us up the coast to Big Sur in the old pickup, with a cooler full of sandwiches Maggie had made at 5 in the morning because she didn't trust either of us to feed ourselves properly on the road. At some point, one of us fell asleep first. I think it was me. When I woke up, Ethan was already at the kitchen table with coffee made and his laptop open, and the morning light coming through the safe house window was the particular pale gold that only exists in California in September. And for a moment, just a moment, everything felt almost ordinary. You let me sleep, I said. You needed it. He pushed a cup across the table without looking up. Sandra's coming at 10. We have time. I sat down across from him. Outside, a mockingbird was doing what mockingbirds do in California. Neighborhoods cycling through every sound it had ever heard, relentless and completely pleased with itself. I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup and looked at my son and thought about how strange it was to be sitting in a safe house in Burbank on a Tuesday morning, feeling something that could only be described as grateful. Last night, I said. You said there was something you hadn't told me. Ethan closed the laptop. He looked up, and something in his expression was different from the night before. The guilt was gone, or mostly gone, replaced by something more considered. The face of a man who had been working up to a conversation and had finally decided he was ready to have it. The money, he said. Dad, the money was never the point. I set my cup down. Richard's estate scheme, the trust document, the Diana, the whole structure, it would have netted him maybe $3.5 million after his fees and Diana's cut. For a man with Richard's resources and exposure, that's not a number worth committing murder over. He folded his hands on the table. I knew that from the beginning. Sandra knew it too. What we couldn't figure out for the first couple of weeks after I went to the FBI was what the real number was. What made us worth this level of risk to him. The software, I said. Ethan looked at me. You already got there. Sandra walked me to the edge of it yesterday. I got the rest myself. I thought about the moment in the coffee shop on Glendale Avenue, the 3 pieces dropping into place one by one, like tumblers in a lock. You told me about the project the week before the wedding. You said it would change how people protect their money. You couldn't say everything yet. I couldn't say anything yet, Ethan said, because the moment it became public, Richard would have known exactly what he was losing. He turned the laptop around. On the screen was a network diagram, hundreds of nodes connected by colored lines dense in the center and branching out at the edges like something biological. This is what 2 years of development looks like. Automated pattern recognition for financial fraud detection. It can identify falsified reporting, hidden account structures, irregular wire transfers, the kind of layered offshore activity that takes human forensic accountants months to unravel. He tapped the screen. Our algorithm does it in hours. I leaned forward. Richard's network. Every account, every shell company, every transfer he's made in the last 20 years. Ethan's voice was flat and precise in the way that it got when he was talking about something that mattered to him at the deepest level. The SEC has been investigating him since 2021, but they've been doing it manually, following paper trails through 3 jurisdictions and 4 layers of corporate structure. Our software would have handed them the complete picture in a single report. He paused. Richard knew that. He has contacts inside enough financial institutions to have heard whispers about what we were building, and he understood correctly that the moment Mercer Logic went to market, his entire operation became visible. I sat back in my chair. The mockingbird outside had moved on to a new set of sounds, a car alarm, a dog, something that might have been a phone ringing 3 houses down. California doing what California does, completely indifferent to the weight of what was being said in this kitchen. Task 1, I said almost to myself. You told me about the project in the garage. You said you couldn't tell me everything yet. I know. The FBI file on Diana. It said her targets were people with high-value proprietary technology. Ethan nodded. Sandra flagged that immediately when she ran Diana's full profile. It confirmed what I already suspected, that Richard hadn't found Diana through his usual channels. He'd found her specifically because she had a track record of getting close to people who had something he needed to disappear. And the SEC investigation. I looked at him. Sandra mentioned it twice before yesterday. I didn't fully understand why until she laid it all out in the coffee shop. 3 pieces, Ethan said quietly. You put them together. You left them for me to find. I held his gaze. The same way you left the burner phone in the truck. The same way you left the program in the GPS system. You knew I'd get there. Something moved across his face that I hadn't seen in a long time, since he was a kid, maybe sitting on the shop floor watching me take apart an engine, asking questions and getting answers and filing everything away with that particular focused hunger that was entirely his mother's and entirely his own. You taught me to read the whole system, he said. Not just the part that's making noise, the whole thing. I had to look away for a moment. The window, the gold light, the ridiculous mockingbird. Sandra confirmed it this morning, Ethan continued. The arrest last night triggered a parallel review of 7 other cases connected to Richard's financial network. 3 of them have been cold for years. The software we've been building, even in its current form, still in development, is going to be the key piece of evidence in at least 4 of those prosecutions. Gerald Whitmore, I said. Ethan's jaw tightened. His case is one of the 7. I nodded, slowly. The way you nod when something lands in the place it was always going to land. The software, I said, it survived. They didn't get to it. Backed up on 4 separate servers, Ethan said. 2 domestic, 2 international. Richard's team would have needed 6 months and a court order in 3 jurisdictions to get to all of them, and even then, he stopped. The corner of his mouth moved. They were never going to get to all of them. I picked up my coffee cup. It had gone slightly cold the way coffee does when a conversation is more important than drinking it. You need to finish it, I said. I know. And sell it to the right people, not the biggest check, the right people. I know that too. He looked at me steadily. I've been thinking about who that is since about day 3 in Reno. I have some names. Good, I set the cup down. Then let's... My pocket buzzed. The burner phone, but this time it wasn't Sandra's number or Ethan's line. It was Frank's cell forwarded through the relay. I answered. Tom... Frank's voice was doing something strange, tight and loose at the same time, like a man trying to hold on to a normal tone of voice, while something very unnormal was happening around him. I just saw the news, Channel 7. They're running the footage from outside the Century City building. Richard in cuffs, the whole thing. A pause that lasted just long enough. And Tom they showed you, standing on the sidewalk. You're on television, you stupid old man. I laughed. It came out full and real and completely unplanned, the kind of laugh that surprises you from the inside and across the table. Ethan looked up from his coffee with wide eyes and then started laughing too, and the sound of it filled the small safe house kitchen in Burbank on a Tuesday morning in September and went out through the window into the California air. "Frank," I said when I could speak again. "Are you crying?" "Absolutely not," Frank said immediately. "I have allergies. It's September. The Santa Ana winds." "Frank." A pause, then gruffly, "Shut up, Tom." I pressed my hand over my mouth for a moment. My eyes were burning again, the good kind this time. "Go open the shop," I said. "I'll be there soon." 2 weeks later, I opened the shop at 6 in the morning, the same way I'd opened it every morning for 40 years. Key in the lock, roll the door up, the smell of motor oil and metal and old coffee hitting me in the face like a greeting from something that had never once let me down. The bays empty and waiting the tools on the pegboard exactly where they belonged, the light coming in, low and gold, through the east-facing windows, the way it always did in October. Some things, when everything else has been turned inside out, stay exactly where you left them. I used to think that was just luck. Standing in the doorway of Mercer Auto on a Wednesday morning in early October, I understood for the first time that it wasn't luck at all. It was the result of 40 years of showing up and doing the work even when the work was hard and the reward was invisible and nobody was watching. My father had built this place with his hands. I'd kept it with mine. Someday, not yet, but someday Ethan would decide what it became next. I put the coffee on and pulled the first car of the day into Bay 1. Jimmy arrived at 6:30, the way Jimmy always arrived, quietly, efficiently, with no fanfare and no announcement, just the sound of his truck in the lot and then his footsteps, and then he was there pulling on his work shirt and checking the board without needing to be told anything. "Morning, boss," he said. "Morning, Jimmy." That was all. It was enough. At 9 o'clock, a car I didn't recognize pulled into the lot. A rental, the paper plates gave it away before the door even opened. And then Ethan got out, and he was wearing his old work clothes, the ones he kept in a bag at the back of the shop, from the years when he used to spend Saturdays helping out. And he had 2 cups of coffee from the place on Cesar Chavez that he knew I liked, and he was grinning like he'd won something. "I thought you had a company to run," I said. "I do." He handed me a cup. "But the affidavit cleared yesterday. The court confirmed I was never legally declared dead. The TRO on Mercer Logic assets was lifted Monday, full operational control, restored as of 8 o'clock this morning." He leaned against the bay door with the ease of someone who had grown up in this doorway, who knew the exact angle of the light at this hour, and the exact sound the compressor made when the temperature changed. "The Seattle contract is back on the table. Meetings next week." He took a sip of his coffee. "I have a few hours. Put me to work." I pointed at the Chevy Silverado in Bay 2 that had been waiting on a brake job since Tuesday. "Brakes," I said. He looked at the car, then at me. The corner of his mouth moved. "You're going to make me do brakes." "You said put you to work." He laughed and grabbed a pair of gloves from the rack, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't even known was still tight. We worked side by side through the morning, the 2 of us under the Silverado. The clink of tools and the occasional instruction and the comfortable silence of people who know each other well enough not to need to fill every moment. Jimmy moved around us with his usual quiet efficiency, handing tools without being asked, disappearing when he wasn't needed, reappearing when he was. The radio played something from the 60s that I half remembered and couldn't name. Frank arrived at 10:30 with a box of donuts from the place on First Street. "I brought provisions," he announced, setting the box on the rolling cart with the ceremony of a man who considered this a significant contribution. "The glazed ones are mine. Don't touch them." "All of them?" Ethan asked from under the car. "All the glazed ones, yes." "Frank, there are 9 glazed ones in here." "I know how many there are, Ethan. I counted." Jimmy appeared from behind the tool wall, looked at the donut box, and selected a chocolate one with the focused deliberation of a man making an important decision. He took it outside without comment. Frank watched him go, and then looked at me and shook his head in the way that meant he found Jimmy fundamentally inscrutable and had given up trying. We sat in the sun in front of the shop at noon, all 4 of us on the old bench Frank had dragged out from the side wall years ago, with the last of the donuts and the dregs of the coffee, and the October sun, doing what October sun does in East LA, which is exactly what it does in every other month except somehow cleaner. The jacaranda on the corner had lost its flowers, but not its shape. A kid on a bicycle went by, twice the way kids go by when they're trying to look like they're not looking at something. Richard Cole was in federal detention pending trial. His attorneys had filed for bail 3 times. All 3 motions had been denied. The charges, 9 counts federal, including conspiracy to commit murder and wire fraud, carried mandatory minimums that made the rest academic. The trial was scheduled for the following spring. Diana Reeves had been extradited to New York to face additional charges related to her first husband's death. The DA in Manhattan had been waiting a long time for that particular file to reopen. Detective Morris and Richard's contact inside the LAPD had been placed on indefinite suspension the morning after the arrest. An internal affairs investigation was underway. Sandra had told me that part with the particular satisfaction of someone who had been waiting for that specific domino to fall for 11 months. And Gerald Whitmore's case had been reopened. His daughter had been notified. Sandra said the woman had cried for 20 minutes on the phone and then said, "Thank you," 14 times, and then apologized for crying, which made Sandra, who I had come to understand did not cry, had perhaps chemically removed the option, go very quiet for a moment before changing the subject. I looked at the photograph on the wall inside the shop. I could see it through the open bay door from where I was sitting, the one I kept above the workbench, the old one, the one from the day we repainted the sign. Thomas and Maggie and Ethan, at 12 years old, squinting into the sun. My father's shop, my son's inheritance. Maggie's hand on my chest, her face tipped up into a laugh I could still hear if I tried. "What do you think she'd say?" Ethan asked. He was looking at the same photograph. He'd always been able to tell when I was looking at it even from a distance. "About which part?" I said. "All of it. The whole thing." I thought about it. About Maggie, who had run the books for this shop for 15 years and could spot a dishonest number at 40 paces. Who had told me 3 months before she died that the most important thing I could do after she was gone was not turn into a man who stopped trusting people because that was a waste of a good heart. She'd say you were reckless," I told him. "She'd say I should have put a GPS tracker on you when you were 16 so I could find you when you did things like this." I paused. "And then she'd say she was proud of you, in that order." Ethan looked at the photograph for another moment. His jaw was tight in that way it got, when he was feeling something he hadn't figured out how to say yet. "I'm going to finish the software," he said, "and I'm going to name it after her." The bench was quiet for a moment. Frank looked down at his coffee. Jimmy, who had come back inside at some point and was now standing in the bay doorway with his arms crossed, said nothing, but I saw his jaw move. "Maggie," I said, just the word, testing the weight of it in the morning air. "Maggie." Ethan confirmed. I nodded once. The way Frank had nodded at me in his kitchen 2 weeks ago, just once because once was enough. Then I stood up, picked up my coffee cup, looked at the 3 of them, my son, my oldest friend, the man who had shown up at 2 in the morning because that was simply what he did, and I looked at the bay behind them and the tools on the wall and the sign my father had painted by hand on a Saturday morning 40 years ago, while my mother told him it was crooked. "All right," I said. "Silverado's not going to finish itself." Ethan groaned. Frank laughed. Jimmy was already walking back toward the lift. I followed them inside. "I'm a mechanic. I've always been a mechanic. It's not just what I do, it's how I see the world. Everything is a system. Everything has parts. When something breaks, you don't stand outside and mourn the machine. You open it up, you find what failed, you remove it, and you replace it with something better. My family was damaged. Richard Cole found a crack, and he worked it for everything it was worth, and for 10 days he nearly had us. But here is what he didn't account for, what men like Richard never account for, because they've spent so long looking at the price of everything that they've lost, the ability to see the weight of anything. He didn't account for an 8-year employee who notices strange cars and stays late without being asked. He didn't account for a retired cop who services brakes on a Tuesday and remembers what perfect feels like. He didn't account for a son who trusted his father enough to leave a message in a truck he knew only one person would ever find. And he didn't account for a 66-year-old mechanic from East LA who has spent his whole life refusing to give up on machines that other people have already written off. The machine still runs, because the most important parts, every single one of them, are still right here. My name is Thomas Mercer, a 66-year-old mechanic from East Los Angeles, and this is the family story I will carry for the rest of my life. I trusted the wrong person. I missed signs that were right in front of me. So, If you take one thing from this, don't be like me. Don't wait until everything is on fire before you start asking questions. Look closer, look sooner. Here is what this family betrayal taught me. Betrayal doesn't destroy a family. It only reveals who truly belongs in one. I believe God doesn't take something away without replacing it with something worth more. Ethan is alive. That is my answer. My personal opinion is simple. Every family story has cracks. Cracks don't mean collapse. A broken machine is not a dead machine as long as someone is willing to fix it. If this story of family betrayal touched you in any way, drop a comment below and tell me what you felt. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to this channel because the next family story coming your way will hit even harder than this one. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. A note before you go. The stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted purely for educational and reflective purposes. If this type of content isn't for you, that's completely okay. Feel free to explore other content that fits you better. No hard feelings.